Our experience in this field shows that focusing on projects rather than broader policies strangles the system and prevents long-term planning. If funds are allocated to projects that last only 2 years without a medium to long-term vision, this leads to a somewhat instrumental approach focused on achieving short-term project indicators, neglecting structured and sustainable planning in the long run.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Opening the Door podcast. On Opening the Door, we talk about different aspects of housing discrimination with the voices directly involved, together with experts in the field, and me, your host, Paola Seremetis. If you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out our previous episodes where we've looked at housing discrimination from the perspectives of two important actors, individuals with a migratory background and housing providers. However, as many of you know, the housing discrimination landscape involves more than just tenants and landlords. That is why today we'll focus on other groups of actors, each of whom in their own way shape housing policies or make decisions that can profoundly affect housing access in every city or country, civil society organizations, and public authorities. Civil society organizations in particular serve as important bridges between the public and private sectors, connecting individuals with resources and services that might not be available otherwise. That is why their efforts are vital in addressing housing challenges, especially for people with a migratory background. In today's episode, we'll hear from professionals working in Italy, Greece, and Malta, and learn from their hands-on experiences with individuals with a migratory background. We will try to understand what challenges they face in facilitating housing access, the strategies they use to overcome these challenges, how different actors can support their efforts to make them more effective and efficient, and how government programs and policies intersect with their work. I am very happy to have with us professionals from Home for All and Refugees Welcome in Italy, the Blue Refugee Center and the Municipality of Thessaloniki from Greece, and the Housing Authority of Malta. I can't wait to hear about their work and the impact they're making on the ground. So, let's begin with our first guest from Homes for All. Georgia, can you tell us a bit about your role at Homes for All and how your organization works to expand housing access in Italy?
I'm Georgia. I'm an architect, and within Homes for All in recent years, I've been involved in both a slightly more technical part of real estate renovations, as Homes for All is mainly concerned with putting back into circulation the existing housing stock that in some parts of the city, in particularly, remains vacant. So it becomes a burden for the community. The families that are placed inside these apartments are families in housing emergency. Homes for All then tries quickly and effectively to find apartments, properties, renovate them, and rent to these families, accompanying them at the same time with social path aimed at their empowerment in order to give them the tools to achieve their own housing stability and autonomy. Homes for All is a private company that is based on private capital for shareholders who share the company's capital. The main advantage is that we offer guaranteed rent. As a provider, we commit to a social support model that ensures regular payment of the rent. This means that property owners do not have to worry about uncertainties related to rental income. Additionally, the profit from the model is not speculative, but is based on a long-term security. Joining the system also allows them to benefit from tax advantages and rewards resulting from European regulations that encourage this type of activity.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I think this approach is really helpful. The fact that you are not only regenerating urban environments, but also using urban regeneration to house families in housing emergencies, and doing so by providing guaranteed rent and social accompaniment is really valuable. Through our research in the Come Home project, we actually found that financial solvency is the most common concern among landlords in Turin and Thessaloniki when renting to individuals with a migratory background. So I think the actions you are taking are really helping to increase incentives for housing providers to rent to people who might otherwise find it hard to access housing. You also mentioned that your focus is on helping those in housing emergencies. Within the groups you assist, are there any specific populations that face more challenges in accessing housing?
The people who have the most difficulty in accessing housing are people who, for various reasons, have difficulty in finding work. So they have more difficulty in finding stable housing, and in understanding what are the channels that enables them to access housing in general, and even more so to access subsidized housing. And so it often happens that this target has a migratory background.
You mentioned earlier that Homes for All offers guaranteed rent. I'm curious, have you developed any specific tools or strategies to further facilitate housing access for people with a migratory background? Perhaps by helping these individuals access housing or by addressing the concerns of housing providers and maybe creating incentives for them to rent?
The Housing Manual. It's a manual we conceived with a purely pragmatic approach. When the first families moved into the houses we had renovated, we realized that they didn't yet have the tools to understand what it meant to handle the regular maintenance of a house. This is often a challenging topic even for families accustomed to the Italian system, who knows the duties of tenants. As I mentioned earlier, for families with a migrant background, accessing this type of information is even more complex. Therefore, in this manual, we compiled a series of practical information to guide tenants in fulfilling their responsibilities as renters. At the same time, this manual also served as a mutual certification of the state of the premises, and it's a form of responsibility taken by the tenants. It is important to know that, especially in this initial experience, we were not merely giving a house and removing the tenants' responsibilities. Rather, in a logic of housing stability, it was crucial for the tenant to know that they were being provided with a house with certain furnishings and well-maintained systems. Other elements for which they had to take responsibility included routine maintenance. This activity involves keeping the house in a good condition, taking care of it, and ensuring that the next family can enjoy the same quality of housing.
Thank you for sharing that. It is great to see that through your work, you try to address two of the main concerns of housing providers, economic solvency and housing upkeep. I'd love to hear more about the impact of your work. Is there a specific memory or experience that stands out to you?
I recall one of the first families that joined our program. It was a couple with 2 children. When they moved into the house, the woman did not yet speak Italian and did not drive. She was a very young woman who had to take care of these 2 young children, but she didn't have the tools to do much else. The husband, also young, had to work to try to bring in money. Over time, thanks to the support provided, the woman took a language course and obtained her driver license, allowing her to be more independent, for example, in taking the children to school. After approximately 18 months of support, she found a small internship or a job that complemented her husband's work. Eventually, they even had a 3rd child, thanks to the greater stability they had achieved. I mentioned this driver license not because it's an essential service, but because often people do not always live in city centers and may need to move around independently. This represents an additional capability.
Thank you so much for your insights, Georgia, and for all the amazing work you're doing. Now let's move on to our second organization from Italy, Refugees Welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about the origins of Refugees Welcome, its mission, and your role within the organization?
Refugees Welcome is a third sector organization founded in 2005 during the height of the European refugee crisis, inspired by a German model. Our proposal stems from a simple thought. Why should these people live in camps and not in homes like everyone else? This idea sparked the interest of a group of activists who decided to meet in Bologna on September 11th, I believe leading to a phase of gestation and discussion. The context in which we operate always makes a difference. It's different working in Germany versus Italy, but by the end of 2015, a headquarters was established in Milan, and the first efforts to raise public awareness began. At that point, our mission became very clear: to involve citizens in supporting the integration of refugees arriving in Italy. Since then, we have grown to have 29 active groups across Italy and a staff of over 30 people, both in the central office and in the field. My role is to oversee project design and to serve as a project manager for specific projects and services.
Thanks so much for sharing. Can you please also describe the main programs your organization runs to support refugees and asylum seekers, including their objectives and how they operate?
We currently run 3 main programs. 1. Family housing. This program is aimed at young adults and mother-child units who are transitioning from reception paths or, in this case, those coming from the Ukrainian crisis. We work with programs supported by the Civil Protection, UNICEF, or as part of the organization's institutional activities depending on the opportunities and possibilities available in the territories. We implement a registry of welcoming families similar to the foster families registry, where individuals can sign up to host refugees. Second, community matching program. This provides one-on-one support between refugee or asylum seekers and local citizens in response to the regulations introduced by the reception system to facilitate integration into the community. This program involves matching people and monitoring relationships, aiming to place these relationships within an intercultural context beyond the mere value of the relationship itself. And third, program for refugee asylum seeker students, targeted at at-risk students classified as such by the University of Padua. This program identifies students from countries where they would be eligible to apply for asylum, such as Iran, but who, for various reasons, do not do so and who represent vulnerabilities similar to those of refugees. We offer our associative practices, such as family housing and mentoring, to support their educational paths and social inclusion in our community.
It's so great to see that you're not only addressing housing, but also facilitating integration and mentoring, as well as how you've adapted your approach to cater to specific groups, like students, and involving local citizens in the integration process. I'd love to hear more about the challenges you've encountered, particularly with housing access. How are you managing these difficulties?
Across all these programs, we encounter the challenge of accessing housing, which is particularly evident in certain areas, such as Milan and Rome, territories that are very complex, and also in Padua, for example, with significant pressure on students. It is clear that there is a bias against migrants. What we have understood and try to use to mitigate the situation is the level of moral guarantee or knowledge. In other words, relationships become a means to overcome these difficulties. For example, if a mentor guarantees that the person has a job and stability, it is more likely that this person will be given a house. However, this approach leads to situations that are difficult to scale, as managing thousands of relationships on the ground and the numbers involved for the tailored nature of refugees' welcome activities only works up to a point. Clearly, we realize that other measures, resources, and greater collaboration among various territorial actors are needed, especially considering the lack of public investment over the past 40 years.
It must be frustrating to know the impact these personal connections can have, but to see the limitations when dealing with a larger system that lacks the necessary public support. But I would love to know about the kind of impact you are seeing from your programs right now.
On our impact framework, we have various stakeholders on whom we generate effects. In some ways, we influence the operational methods of real estate agencies and individual landlords. Our numbers, around 200 to 300 placements in recent years out of 50 million people living in Italy, are not particularly large. However, our impact is also felt on public policies. For instance, the registry of welcoming families that we have implemented in Padua, Ravenna, Rome and Bari. In Bari, this has become a stable policy even for regular citizens. In Rome, the situation is different, but the fact that even important administrations have recognized our practices and the attempt to institutionalize and respond to integration by working on multiple dimensions, such as housing and social relationships, is a small achievement we recognize. Clearly, to work with individual property owners, structural policies and a medium to long-term action horizon are needed rather than just project-based approaches.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think your work addresses many important aspects of housing discrimination, and the way you involve citizens in cities as active participants in refugee and migrant integration is truly powerful. It helps raise awareness and educate communities, fostering understanding and empathy towards individuals with migratory backgrounds, not just acceptance or tolerance. Now, turning to our next expert from Blue Refugee Center, you've been working on the ground in Thessaloniki. Could you describe the current situation regarding housing access in the city and the work you're doing at the center?
Good morning. Currently, I am the coordinator of center that supports refugees and migrants and vulnerable groups generally in Thessaloniki. Basically, migrants and refugees are the main target group, say, of center. So the vast majority of our beneficiaries are with this background. Housing is a very big challenge. I would say that on a general level, they face the same problems, let's say, that locals would face with housing in Thessaloniki. As we all know, there is a housing problem in the city. Availability of accommodation is small and getting smaller. Rents are going up. So it is very difficult for the population of the city to find a house, to rent a house and to live in the city. This is being multiplied, let's say, for refugee migrants due basically to discrimination that they face when they try to rent. There is also, besides the discrimination, what we see and what a lot of beneficiaries that come to our center have reported is the lack of information on how to access housing. Another huge challenge, which is not always the case, but it does exist, of course, is the financial challenges when finding and renting a house. So we try to support as much as we can with various aspects of life in Thessaloniki that have to do with accommodation. So to explain, provide information to people that require information, to actually help them with any bureaucratic issues that might have to do with accommodation, opening tax accounts, doing their tax declarations, etc., etc. Then after that, it is the general support, I would say, like in supporting in finding work, in supporting with any legal issues that might have, mainly for their residence permits in Greece, the support that someone will need to be able to rent a housing.
As the other professionals mentioned, the availability of information is often lacking, which makes housing access very difficult for people with migratory backgrounds. I think the way you're addressing this issue by providing support and information through a wide range of activities closely connected to accessing housing and to helping with individual integration is very helpful. Focusing on discrimination itself, I'm curious to know what solutions do you think could be helpful to address the discrimination and challenges refugees and migrants face when searching for housing?
I think that what would be very helpful is some sort of intermediation, let's say, of liaison between people looking for a house, refugees and migrants looking for a house, and homeowners. I think that we have seen that this works. I'm not just necessarily talking about translation, talking about someone that can explain to both parts and try to bring them together to clear out any misconceptions on both parts, to try to combat discrimination on the ground when it happens. Because like I said, there is a lot of discrimination that is based on misinformation, like big families will destroy my house, or single African women will, I don't know, whatever anyone can have in their mind. So a lot of people have asked for it.
This is very true. During our interviews with individuals with a migratory background on this podcast, many mentioned the importance of mediation between themselves and housing providers and how it could increase trust and help with housing access. Thank you again for your insights. I'd now like to turn my attention to our expert from the Municipality of Thessaloniki. Could you tell us a little bit about your work and role and share some insights about the housing program in Thessaloniki? I'd love to hear about the challenges individuals with migratory backgrounds face at Thessaloniki.
I'm a lawyer, and right now I'm the coordinator of a housing program in the city of Thessaloniki. For 7 years, from 2016 since 2023, I've been working as a coordinator in the STIA program, which was a program concerning refugees, also in the city of Thessaloniki, and has been implemented by the Municipality of Thessaloniki and some other municipalities of the wider area of Thessaloniki. And also in this program, many non-governmental organizations were offering support, both in the previous program that I was working and also in this program. The most common challenge that these people face is the mistrust of the owners of the apartments in the city. Unfortunately, since there is a specific image of these people, of refugees, and this is the fact that they don't have enough money to cover their rent, the owners are not very willing in giving their property to these people. However, through these programs, both STIA and the program that I'm working right now, it's called Calypsy, we're trying to reassure the owners that the municipality or another public body, like the ministry or an organization working with and under the ministry, we undertake the rent of the apartments. In the case of STIA, not only the rent, but also every other cost that had to do with the apartment. Also, we try to give something extra to the owners, such as giving in advance a few rents, not just one rent, which sometimes makes them more willing to give their houses to the program.
I think your work in providing economic guarantees has some similarities with Homes for All, which, according to our research and survey results from Thessaloniki, Malta, and Turin, addresses the main concern for landlords in both of your organization's locations. But I was wondering, do you think additional services should be included in housing programs to better support refugees and migrants beyond the economic guarantee?
I think that any program should provide an umbrella of services, wide services regarding the landlords, regarding the support in finding a job, regarding any other kind of support, because having only a housing policy bare without anything else, this is not enough for these people. These people need guidance and they need wider support.
You're absolutely right. Housing discrimination isn't just a standalone problem. It's intertwined with various social, economic, and sometimes political factors. Tackling these issues effectively means looking at the big picture and considering all the different actors involved. Thank you again for sharing your insights and the important work you're doing. Let's now turn to our final expert, who is in Malta. Could you introduce yourself and explain the mission, history, and key functions of the Housing Authority?
My name is Brian Mikallef, and I'm the Executive Head for Policy at the Housing Authority in Malta. I'm an economist by profession, and I've joined the authority last year from the Central Bank of Malta. The Housing Authority was established in 1976, so it will soon celebrate its 50th anniversary, and its roles and responsibilities have evolved quite significantly over the years. Today, our mission statement emphasizes the importance of providing and sustaining decent, social and affordable housing opportunities, promote housing stability, and support social mobility. The functions of the Housing Authority can be grouped into 4 broad categories. The first one is the allocation of social housing. The second one focuses on affordability and home ownership schemes. This role has expanded considerably in recent years. The third function is the role of the Housing Authority as the regulator of the private residential rental market in Malta. And finally, being the largest landlord in Malta, the last category focuses on the physical dimension of the stock of housing that the authority owns.
I think this is really great, as you are focusing on addressing the root of many challenges mentioned by other professionals, such as facilitating affordability. I'm also curious about the more concrete actions you've taken. Could you please tell me some of the steps you've implemented over the past few years?
One of the main challenges is overcrowding. This can be due to segregation and ethnic clustering, perhaps as a result of access to housing being made more difficult for some migrant minorities. And in recent months, we have heard of quite a few number of cases of flagrant abuses by some landlords, who squeeze in more migrants in apartments than permitted by planning regulations. Something had to be done on this, for the well-being, health and safety of these tenants, but also of the residents living in the same residential block. As a result, following several meetings with various stakeholders, the Housing Authority has introduced legal amendments to curb this abuse by limiting the number of tenants that can reside in each bedroom. Now, not more than 2 tenants will be allowed in each bedroom, and for larger units, those with 4 or 5 bedrooms, these properties will need to have at least 2 bathrooms. These regulations came into effect on 1 September 2024. It is still too early to assess the impact that these new regulations will have on the sector, but at least it shows an authority with ears on the ground and the willingness to intervene. Let me now turn to rental affordability, which is commonly mentioned as one of the biggest challenges facing migrant workers in Malta. Rents have been increasing by around 5% per annum over the past few years, and it is no secret that tenants, especially those on low income, can struggle to make ends meet. To provide rental relief, the Housing Authority has a housing benefit scheme for low-income tenants with different subsidies depending on their household type and size. The expenditure on this program has increased significantly in recent years, from around 800,000 in 2013 to slightly more than 9.5 million in 2023. This reflects both an increase in the number of beneficiaries and the higher rents experienced over this period.
Thank you very much, Rim. This was very insightful, and hearing about concrete steps always brings hope. Listening to all of you who are directly involved in tackling housing access and addressing housing discrimination reminds me, and I think all of us, of the complexity of the issue, especially for individuals with a migratory background. Addressing housing discrimination requires a multifaceted approach that considers various levels, from grassroots initiatives to policy-level recommendation and interventions. It's clear that many of you are exploring different strategies, from raising awareness, facilitating affordability, and providing guarantees, and collaborating with diverse actors to improve housing access for individuals with a migratory background and others who struggle to access housing. However, for these actions to be truly effective, an enabling policy environment is really important. Advocacy efforts are essential for shaping policies that protect against discrimination, but government support, resources, and effective city and country policies can significantly impact the success of any organization's work. So I'm curious, are there policies specific in your context that facilitate or hinder housing access? What about public programs or support? And if you could implement a policy to improve housing access, especially for individuals with a migratory background, what would it be? We can first have refugees welcome and then Rim from the Blue Refugee Center.
Short-term rentals, for example, not only hinder housing access for the specific target group, but also affect the general population, with a greater impact on the vulnerable and weak. Additionally, the lack of investment in public housing in recent years has limited the availability of housing on the territory. There are also elements that may seem intuitively unrelated but are relevant, such as public transportation. Some areas are poorly connected, effectively preventing people from living in less metropolitan contexts because they would not be able to reach their workplaces. Moreover, there are no incentives to encourage real estate intermediaries to reserve a portion of properties for certain population groups or users. Finally, systemic racism in our society serves as a backdrop to all of this and further complicates access to housing. Our experience in this field shows that focusing on projects rather than broader policies strangles the system and prevents long-term planning. If funds are allocated to projects that last only 2 years without a medium to long-term vision, this leads to a somewhat instrumental approach focused on achieving short-term project indicators, neglecting structured and sustainable planning in the long run. The issue of housing has an ontological dimension and for migrants and refugees represents the intersection of multiple components. For example, if one does not have a stable job contract, it is difficult to obtain housing, even if the contract is permanent. Often, those exiting a reception path do not yet have full autonomy in managing services and seizing opportunities. These individuals have significant information asymmetries that the system cannot bridge. In an ideal world, the market should self-regulate, but the main problem is the lack of adequate information. The employment issue could be relevant. Greater job protection could have a positive effect on housing access. It is important to note that in Italy, the employment situation is becoming significant, with a shortage of workers and the exploration of labor corridors to address the lack of workforce. To address the situation, a mix of interventions is needed, including public and subsidized housing and the recovery of ERP properties, often managed by municipalities and sometimes closed. Without changes in the rules of engagement and management of these issues, it is difficult to offer concrete solutions. Being from Piedmont, I see the ATC, the Territorial Housing Agency, and the various pieces of this puzzle, and I believe that greater valorizations of public assets could be a useful step.
I think the conclusion from all the housing programs and all the work with refugee migrants is that there needs to be some kind of support besides. People do not only need a house, they need also support into integrating the daily. They need to be supported into finding their own stepping. Again, I would say that there is a general housing problem in Thessaloniki, which needs to be addressed. The refugees and the migrants are in the worst end of this problem, but there is a whole problem. The fact that there are people living in Thessaloniki for several years with a steady job, sometimes integrated into the city and the way of life, who have actually the capacity to find a house, but they cannot do it because the rent is so high, they fall into the general problem of accommodation in the city. But specifically for refugees and migrants, I would say that what a lot of people requested, and what I also agree would be very helpful, is besides the financial support and the benefits that they should take, is some kind of services that offer information on generally housing and accommodation in the city, laws, contracts, where to look, how to look.
I think what both of you have shared is really insightful. On the one hand, it's important to combine short-term projects with long-term planning. And for this to happen, we need an interdisciplinary policy environment where various policy actors collaborate to address the issues comprehensively. On the other hand, we must address the root causes of the challenges faced by the individuals with migratory backgrounds and create policies that ensure affordable housing access, as well as access to jobs and fair work. Next, let's hear from the Municipality of Thessaloniki responding.
The one program is the program I'm working with right now, CAIPSI, and also under the municipalities, there are programs that enhance the acquisition of Greek language and also offer consultation and advice sessions regarding jobs. This helps also owners to trust immigrants since they are able to contact with them in the same language, or they see someone who is willing to try and get a job and start working, so have enough money to proceed with his life. These policies have influenced our work in these programs only positively. However, it needs more programs because this is not enough. People need more help and more support of public bodies in order to be able to proceed with their lives in a foreign country where they have no means to do it by themselves.
We definitely need more programs like this and additional policies to support such initiatives. Beyond what you've all mentioned about creating policies, I want to emphasize that establishing monitoring mechanisms is equally vital. This includes regular tracking of progress, data collection, and evaluation of outcomes to ensure the policies are effectively implemented. I think by listening to you all, we realized that despite the challenges associated with housing discrimination, numerous actions could be and is being taken on the ground by professionals like you and to some levels at the policy level. But I think several questions still remain important to address. How can we ensure these programs reach people who need them and operate efficiently? Do people trust the actors involved? If not, what is the reason and what steps can be taken to address this issue? To understand this better, I would like to ask Giulia Bruschi, Data and Research Project Manager at the Mixed Migration Center Europe.
During our data collection phase in Turin, in Thessaloniki, and Malta, we have discovered that despite the efforts of various organizations, most individuals with a migratory background primarily address their housing needs through personal connections, both within the migrant community or beyond. During our conversation with individuals with a migratory background, we also realized that they are less likely to utilize services or programs offered by civil society organizations or public authorities due to a lack of trust, and often they are unaware of these resources altogether. Our research indicates that reliance on personal network is a prominent strategy for migrants dealing with housing issues. In Turin, 58% of respondents relied on other migrants, compared to 40% in Thessaloniki and 38% in Malta. Non-migrant personal network also played a role, particularly in Thessaloniki and Turin. However, the reliance on formal support systems, such as NGOs or local authorities, is notably limited. For example, only 15% of respondents in Thessaloniki, 9% in Turin, and 4% in Malta sought help from NGOs. Even fewer turned to local authorities. Malta shows the highest proportion of respondents who did not seek external assistance compared to Thessaloniki and Turin. Our research also have identified several measures to improve housing access for migrants, including disseminating housing-related information in multiple languages, raising awareness to combat stereotypes, or providing incentives for landlords to rent to migrants. Our focus group discussion and key informant interviews also recommended expanding intermediation schemes between landlords and migrants, increasing funding and continuity for public and social housing programs, or simplifying access procedures, and adopting a broader government actions to make housing more affordable, such as regulating rent prices.
Thank you, Giulia, for sharing, and thanks to guests for their expertise. I hope you've all learned that many professionals are currently working on the ground, providing various solutions tailored to the specific contexts and unique challenges faced by individuals with migratory backgrounds. However, there is always room for improvement, and understanding the missing elements and identifying the specific needs of individuals with a migratory background is an important step in addressing these issues and improving their housing access and integration. We hope this episode has left you hopeful and provided clear indications of the steps we can take and how we can do better. In our upcoming episode, which will be the final episode of this podcast, we will discuss our project, Come Home. You'll hear from our different partners from the project's process, our learnings, the actions we took, and our next steps. If you found our discussions interesting, follow us here. Visit Come Home's LinkedIn page or consider sharing an episode you enjoyed with a friend, family member, or colleague. Thank you for staying with us until this moment. We are partners from 3 European cities in Italy, Greece, and Malta working to combat housing discrimination in our communities. And this is the Opening the Door podcast. Until the next episode, please take care and talk to you soon.